And we're live. It is Friday, December 13th, 2024, 8 o'clock a.m. And we have a very special show for you today because today, for the first time in the history of Dog Shirt TV, we are actually going to out a U.S. intelligence officer. We've never done it before. We don't share classified information on Dog Shirt TV, but in this case, we're not going to have to share classified information in order to out a U.S. intelligence officer. What's more, there's a special wrinkle about this because the intelligence officer that we are going to out is consenting. So we are not outing somebody against his, her, or its, or their will. We are the intelligence officer in question is wholly complicit in the decision to out this person. So we're just going to wait for this person to show up so that we can out the person as a U.S. intelligence officer. But until, oh, and I should add, this person is right now is still an intelligence officer. So we're not releasing, hey, this person's a former, none of that. This person is a U.S. intelligence officer right now. So it's a first. It's breaking news on Dog Shirt TV. You have not seen this reported anywhere else, not in the Washington Post, not in the New York Times, not in the Wall Street Journal, not in the Bulwark. So this is content you cannot get anywhere else, a live outing of a U.S. intelligence officer. Okay, but the thing is, I can't out the intelligence officer without the intelligence officer present. So, intelligence officer, if you are in the audience, you got a request to come on screen if you want to be outed. Otherwise, I'm just going to have to sit here and monologue on other matters until you do. So while we are waiting for the intelligence officer to figure out the complicated mechanics of being outed on live television on In Lieu of Fun, I will remind you that the sun is shining. Actually, it's not. It's pretty cloudy. The birds are chirping. It's going to be a great fucking day, and you are watching Dog Shirt TV, which is, as you know, a revolution in morning television. Like they've never done this on Morning Joe. Okay, you've never seen Fox and Friends out an intelligence officer live on TV. And here we go. We're going to do it right now because the intelligence officer has signaled that she wants to be about. Yes, Holly Berkley Fletcher, co-host of In Lieu of Fun, is a serving U.S. intelligence officer for how many more days, Holly?
Hours.
Yeah. Today is your last day.
That's right.
And what
in fact, I'm kind of illegally doing this, but you ruined my plan by going to Israel and being off next week. So
yeah, I know. Look, I think it is much better to do this while you are still serving, so that like somebody at your home agency could, like theoretically institute some disciplinary action, right? But except that it actually doesn't violate any rules, right?
No, I'm overt. I've never been covert, so I'm overt, which is actually more awkward than being covert. That I can elaborate on that. But it is technically means that on U.S. soil you can tell anyone you want who you are. But it's
okay. So let's pose the question. Holly Berkley Fletcher, co-host of Dog Shirt TV, maker of Weird-orama satire videos, Bulwark superfan. What is your day job for the next few hours?
I am a CIA analyst working on Africa.
And how long have you been working at the Central Intelligence Agency?
19 years.
And today is your last day.
That's right. That's right.
How does that feel?
It's been an emotional week. Even though I know I'm doing the right thing, like I know it's time to go. Someone sent me there's a Taylor Swift. There's always a Taylor Swift song, and there's actually a Taylor Swift song that called "It's Time." You know when it's time to go. And that song, I listened to that song and I knew it was time to go.
So, question: did you make this decision because of the election results?
Good question. Short answer is no. I intentionally made the decision and told my superiors um, before the election because I didn't want it entangled in the whole election result issue, just for my own thinking and for my colleagues who, most of whom are going to have to stay and some of whom are very demoralized. Um, so yeah, but I will say if I had been on the fence, I would have, that would have been it. I can't do it anymore.
All right, so let's talk about, most people who are going to watch this video actually have no sense of what an analyst does. I mean, we got 3 days of the Condor where the lead character actually is carrying around a gun and kills people and at
That's
one
exactly
point
what I did. Yeah.
at one point says I'm just an analyst.
Right.
Yeah, and so my question
Four
is,
people.
how often have you, in your
Killed people.
capacity,
Four. I counted. Four.
killed people on U.S. soil?
On U.S. soil.
No,
Oh,
because the 3 days of the Condor, Robert Redford character, kind of between, D.C. and, he racks up a bit of a body count for an analyst.
Literally zero. Metaphorically, many, many people. In my mind,
Okay.
so many.
In your mind.
Yeah.
Right.
We won't
And how
enumerate.
many so we're gonna do this how many drone strikes have you called in?
That's class. I can't comment on that.
Okay. um so yeah, so what is the life of, you've been doing this for a long time. What does a CIA Africa analyst actually do? And you can't answer analyzes Africa.
Well, that is what I do, though. That's the answer.
I know, but it's like asking, what does a dentist do?
Yeah.
Dentistry. I mean,
Well, to be
it's not
honest,
very evocative.
it's actually it's mostly pretty boring. I'm not gonna lie. Like of all the mystique surrounding the CIA, most of it honestly is probably in fact I kind of know for a fact because I worked in comms for a little while. A lot of it is encouraged by the CIA because they don't want people. The big secret is that there's a lot of just boring shit. Sorry to Jonathan Rauch. I have comments on Jonathan Rauch's diatribe yesterday, but I'll
We're going to get to that.
Okay. Anyway,
But
it's a lot more. It's a lot of I do anyway. I have had some exciting episodes, I would say, but most of it's like sitting at a desk, reading stuff, reading reports, writing things, briefing people, going to brainstorms, going down for coffee, like trying to get the printer to work, gossip, hearing the gossip, people, cubicle wars, like, oh, I don't like my cube. I want that cube. That person's more senior. So, that kind of thing. Lots of office space, office show
right.
drama. So
here's my question. Then how is working as an Africa analyst at the CIA different from working as, say, a a housing and urban development, program officer.
Well, I'll compare it to something a bit more analogous, which is like, let's say I worked for Brookings or CSIS as an analyst. Like, how does it differ? It doesn't.
Yeah, that hits close to home.
Yeah. Right. It doesn't differ a whole lot, except that you have more information. You have more and different information. So, like, you have reporting streams that they would not have access to. Although, frankly, I will say journalists have reporting streams that journalists have a lot more, and sort of think tank and people out in the world, they have fewer restrictions on just their own, like picking up the phone and talking to someone, versus that's harder for us. So there's pros and cons, but generally, yes, you have access to information, and people, and policymakers that people wouldn't necessarily have on the outside.
Okay, so as people ask interesting questions, I'm going to post them on the screen.
Okay.
And the rule here is anything you can answer that you want to answer, you should feel free to answer. Anything that you either don't want to answer or it would be inappropriate for you to answer, you can just ignore.
Okay.
And so that way you never have to say, I'm not going to answer that question because it would be inappropriate, or John Hawkinson, that's a stupid question, I'm not going to answer that, or it would be inappropriate for me to, or it's classified and I'd have to kill you.
Okay, someone asked if I could just task people to it depends who you're talking about. So we analysts, I'm going to roll him over. He has his own chair, see, which is very official. Look at his own. He has his own chair.
Yeah, that's good. Has he ever been to Langley?
No. We do have the police dogs, which are very popular. So
right, but you don't have bring your dog to work today?
No, unfortunately.
Or
yeah,
do you have
my kids, but not my dog? So
okay.
Okay. So can we just task him? So generally, that's not what we would do, but analysts work closely with the collectors. We call them, their DO is Director of Operations. These are like the case officers and the people that go out and recruit and manage assets. So we do latch up pretty closely with them and communicate to them our view of what policymakers are interested in. We kind of have the view of the rest of the government side, and then they're kind of on the street, they're kind of on the ground. And so,
and is there a kind of mutual contempt in which they think of you as bookish introverts who actually don't go out in the field and do anything, and you think of them as unintellectual knuckle draggers who don't know how to think about information? All they know how to do is gather it.
Well, I certainly don't think about them that way. I've some of the most impressive people that I've met are the case officers. Not all of them, but some of the, there's been, and people that I really admire, and at various points, friends. Although, it's never quite exactly the same as like your fellow analyst. What do they think of us? I don't think we'll ever truly know, because they are, they're very charming as a rule, and they're kind of master manipulators. And so they're always going on about how smart we are and all of that. And I kind of don't buy it. So I think and to be fair, I think like we're less impressed. I like, we are bookish nerds, and some of us are honestly not even that smart. So,
because I have to say, my experience with the analyst community, which is relatively vast, actually,
yes.
Not because
you're running your own intelligence network, and you're the agency on behalf of some nefarious power, and
you were right until you said that, which is until that last bit. I am running my own intelligence agency. It's called Lawfare. It produces analytic,
Yeah,
mostly not
not that different.
reported product.
Yeah.
There is some reporting, but it's chiefly an analytic engine. And it is staffed by a quite diverse array of people. Several of whom, as prior to going to law school, were agency analysts of one sort or another. And if you work at a DC think tank that has a major foreign policy footprint, quite aside from the lawfare side, analysts are in and out all the time because they're interacting with the other analytic components, of which think tanks are a major one in Washington. And so this is something that I think a lot of people outside of the foreign policy world don't understand, which is just how robust the dialogue is between the CIA and, you do foreign policy events at Brookings, and CIA people routinely show up at them because or register them. Usually it just says US government, because they're being coy in a way that Holly is very much not. But there's a dialogue with the analytic components of the intelligence community that is just part of being at a think tank. Um, and I've always thought that the CIA is fundamentally just a big think tank with a collection arm that's kind of like more like a newspaper. But the newspaper involves the ability to violate the law in local law in 100 countries around the world. One CIA wag once said to me, if it were compliant with local law, you wouldn't need a CIA. That's what the State Department is for.
Yeah.
And so, you have this weird newspaper glommed on to a think tank, and then there is, in addition, a tiny but looms very large in the public mind paramilitary component that does things like fly drones and
Very.
and go in with the Mujahideen when they take Kabul, right, or the Northern Alliance when they take Kabul from the Taliban. And so my but the core analytic group, the biggest difference that I've noticed between the CIA as analytic community and a think tank is that you guys are introverts and we're extroverts, because Brookings people have to go on stage and talk about stuff, and CIA people, go to meetings and give presentations to small groups of people or write the president's PDB. But they generally aren't outward facing. And so my question is, how the hell did an extrovert like you get mixed up with a crowd like that?
We have a good mix of people, actually. That's kind of the old stereotype. They've actually so
It
diversity.
is so not the old. I mean, it may be an old stereotype, but it's so true. You are the most
Not in Africa.
extroverted analyst I've
A
ever
different
met.
vibe on Africa. Europe, Middle East, Russia, certainly. The vibe is a lot more staid and sort of elitist. Africa is people don't come work on Africa. It's a special kind of person, I would say. It's a very small component. And so we've always been latched up quite closely with the collectors because it's just not that big. The mission is really not that big. And so the whole modernization they did in 2013, in which they tried to latch up the ops and the analysts, and then there's other components too. There's support. That's a huge part of it. Is just all the support stuff and the science and the gadgetry stuff. So they tried to latch all that up, and it really didn't have a huge impact on us because we're just small, and so it's a different vibe. But I would say, I mean, diversity is really important to intelligence of all kinds. We've always, in recent memory, tried to get a more diverse workforce. We've a while ago, it used to be all these Ivy Leaguers, and we've definitely tried to, get away from that because it's you're coming from just a whole different milieu,
Is it true that everybody at the CIA smokes pipes?
No.
Because that's the other component of the Ivy League stereotype.
That smoked a pipe. I think I've known like one pipe smoker. Yeah.
Because that's the traditional, right? People who went to Yale, smoke
That's
pipes,
1960, 50,
speak lots of different languages.
Yeah, and overthrow governments.
Yeah, and overthrow governments.
So we don't do any of that anymore. So
it sounds boring.
Yeah,
I can see why you're stepping down.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'm telling you, Ben, the big secret is that it's really not that impressive or exciting. That's the biggest.
All right, there you go. From the belly of the beast itself, it's kind of boring.
Human is just gossip. I mean, human society has always run on gossip. I mean, journalists, that's how they operate. And honestly, these days, journalists often have more access than we do. There's a lot of hurdles, and a lot of baggage that we bring, that, someone might talk to a journalist, or a journalist can easily just sort of slip into a country that, we can't. That's like a whole thing.
Right. If the CIA is going to deploy people,
process and paper trail, and there's a lot of red tape and stuff. So in some ways, we have additional streams of reporting, but then journalists have additional streams of reporting. So,
all right. So I want, other than that it's boring and that you're sick of it, and what is the biggest thing about the CIA at the professional level that people really don't understand?
Except that it's boring. It's not that boring. I don't, it's been a good reality. Well, I think at the moment, people think that the CIA, because, the whole deep state narrative, which we're kind of been thrown into that, with FBI and, some of these other things. First of all, we do not operate on American soil.
You make videos of parody videos on American soil. You realize that now that you've outed yourself, there's like a whole bunch of people are going to go back to those videos and try to figure out what the agency was saying.
So full disclaimer, all of my opinions and viewpoints and videos have nothing to do with the Central Intelligence Agency, which is, I have to say, sometimes, especially in the Trump era, maddeningly apolitical. Like, you see people just, even now, post-election, I had to take the week off from the election just because I knew I couldn't behave myself, I couldn't go in there and do the whole, now we're going to plan for the transition, and what piece do you think President Trump would like to read on our, it's like, I couldn't play the game. And so I'm just like, I'm going to create a problem. And so I'm just going to stay home. And so that's what I did. But no, it's maddeningly apolitical. And I say maddening, it's actually very important that it's apolitical and independent. But what's maddening about it is, in our current era, there's a kind of Orwellian quality to it, because when you have your number one counterintelligence threat, and this is my opinion, but I think there's plenty of basis for it, as your number one counterintelligence threat is the president of the United States, it creates a very strange, concerning, it puts an agency like the CIA in an impossible position. And actually, the only resolution is just to keep serving the counterintelligence threat.
Right.
If Tulsi Gabbard's the DNI, there's nothing to be done. In fact, it would be inappropriate and illegal to not share information with her or with the president. That's not, we don't get to do that. And we shouldn't be able to do that. This is a democracy. An intelligence agency is not, does not get to decide those things in a democracy.
No, I think that's exactly right. And the way that we are supposed to protect against the counterintelligence threat from Trump is to not elect Donald Trump.
That would have been a great idea. Why didn't someone think of that?
You know, and the way we are supposed to protect against the counterintelligence threat of Tulsi Gabbard is to not elect Donald Trump, and then for the Senate, or in the alternative, for the Senate to do its job. By the way, the second is a much less attractive option than the first, because you end up with some Pam Bondi to her Matt Gaetz, and that's no bargain either, though it's a better bargain, I suppose. But you can't have a situation in which the CIA or the FBI is undermining the president because they disagree with, though I have no doubt of the probable voting patterns of CIA analysts. Like, we have an elected leadership in this country, and you don't want the CIA acting like a deep state.
And I have to say, like, this is the thing, and my own parents don't believe me on this, but what I saw in the CIA during Trump 1 is people who hated his guts, who I knew privately, only privately did I know they hated his guts, bending over backwards to make things workable that he wanted. And legal, make things legal and workable, and to try to reroute him when it wasn't. And then when it came down to it, the whistleblower was an analyst on detail at the White House, and reporting it through the proper channels. And he did the textbook. He did the right thing. He saw something that was potentially illegal, and he reported it. But that's,
and never went public about it.
Never went public. And you contrast that with someone like, who, a reality winner, for instance, who saw things that she was concerned about at NSA. She was an NSA person, and took it out of the building, I believe, if I'm getting my facts right, and gave it to the media. That's not what you do. That's illegal. You don't do that. There are channels to report things like that, and there are procedures, and I actually love the NSA, John. The NSA is actually, honestly, the NSA is way cooler than the CIA. So
they have cool toys.
The coolest stuff that I was privy to was pretty much all NSA stuff.
And by the way, that's a building I've spent a lot of time in over the years, and the line at the Starbucks at NSA is the only Starbucks line I have ever been in where you will see like a purple-haired person with a lot of piercings who's like 23 talking animatedly to a military officer who's like ramrod straight, and they're talking about math. And
hybrid, because a lot of
it's a weird hybrid culture, and it's awesome.
A lot of them are military there, so that's why
I think it's 60% military, and then of the civilians, there's an analyst and linguist culture. That's kind of similar-ish to the CIA culture, except I think it's more focused on language and less focused on politics, because they have this enormous volume of signal to process. And then there are the geeks, and the geeks are really geeky.
Yeah, we have techniques too. We have some of that too.
So okay, I want to ask about you sound pretty down on the place.
No,
But then
sorry.
every time I say something that reflects that down, you say no.
Well, it's like
And so
your hometown. Like, if you can say whatever you want about your hometown, but if someone else comes at it, you're like you'll cut a bitch.
okay.
So,
All right, I got it. All right, so here's
you're my
the
last.
thing that you have not said, because in addition to being weirdly extroverted for a CIA officer or for a analyst, notwithstanding your comments about diversity, it really is an introvert set of introverts. But um, uh, one thing you haven't said is that you've actually had quite a distinguished career there, and you've I mean,
Well, some may disagree with that.
yeah, well, some may disagree with that,
Yeah.
but you're a quite
Always
senior Africa analyst. Is that fair?
Yeah. Well, I'm in the senior analytics service, which is it's people who wanted to stay as an analyst and not go into management. And then it gives them a path to leadership-ish. But honestly, it's not. It's a promotion, but it's not. The work doesn't become that much different.
Right, except that you are supervising other analysts who
Sort of.
do right. Like there's a think tank group, and in that think tank, a group of people who study African politics and African leadership, and among that group, you're one of the people who's been there a long time and who's done a lot, written more presidential PDBs than most people. Is that fair?
Again, it's a little fun. It's not like quite that. Anyway, I'm certainly a mentor and a leader and all of that. But there's honestly, some of my colleagues who are lower are their work is really good and they've written a lot, and so it just kind of depends. How often you get in the PDB is kind of out of your hands, because it depends what you're working on and what the priorities are of the administration. And so but I will say on Africa's low priority for every administration. But there's not that many of us compared to other issues. And so, when something blows up in whatever country you're assigned to, like, then you're, as a junior person, you're on the spot. So I would say I got good opportunities very early on in my career because of that. Yeah.
All right, next question. What counts as Africa for the CIA? So like
yeah.
So it's sub-Saharan. So anything where people are speaking Arabic
No, well, Sudan is
MENA.
Sudan that's what I've been working on the last several.
Okay, so Sudan counts?
Oh,
it doesn't count as Middle East and North Africa?
Sudan is Sudan is culturally, the Sahel is the dividing, it's a bit of a hybrid, right? So culturally and linguistically, and there'll be Arabic spoken, but then there's other languages and sort of cultures. And that's actually one of the problems in Sudan is there's cultural and ethnic divides there. So yes, I do have a de facto dog shirt. He's really a painting.
Okay, so some listeners, viewers may not know this, but there are a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes, I see Matt. Way to trigger me, Matt. Africa is a very important country.
Yeah.
That's how to get my head to explain.
So, and it's not like in I venture the guess that in the comparable CIA community, there's no like Asia analyst, right? There's a Central Asia. There are people who do former Soviet Central Asia. There's people who do Korea specifically. Like how many countries and speaking how many hundreds of languages are you expected to be conversant in, or the ability to get conversant in, how quickly?
So the language piece is really not that critical, especially with all the AI translation these days. And also we have just even historically, there's another component that does media translation and things like that. But mainly these days, it's like there's a lot of machine translation that goes on, and that works pretty well. I speak Swahili. I have used it sometimes, but it's not. Also, a lot of countries, just globally, English has become, a real lingua franca that you see globally. But in Africa, because of the British influence, English and French. If you know English and French, like you can pretty much get along almost
How
anywhere.
are your English and
Arabic.
French?
Huh?
How are your English and French?
Well, I don't speak much French, but I've not really worked on francophone countries very much. So again, you can you don't really need language. It helps for sure, like not Swahili's, because most Swahili speakers also speak English. They're like Kenya, is a British colony. Everybody's really well educated. Not everybody, but the education is good, and the education is a lot of English. Tanzania, less English, but Tanzania is also not a very high priority country for
Right.
us. So Congo, Eastern Congo, they speak Swahili, and that is an area that, because there's so much conflict, that we would have to pay attention to. So I mean, it helps. Certainly Arabic, on working on Sudan. I don't speak Arabic, so um, that would be nice to speak Arabic if you're working on Sudan.
And I ask, what about for Southern African purposes? It's a completely, it's, Swahili is not the sort of
No,
lingua franca, and actually English isn't quite really either, because of the prevalence of both French and Portuguese, and German, actually,
yeah, but
territories.
most people speak English. Yeah,
So
Mozambique, they'll speak but again, even Mozambique. I've been to Mozambique. Most people speak serviceable English. Um, so yeah.
and so what, like, when do you go long periods when you're basically doing Sudan work, or basically doing Kenya work, or are you supposed to have eyes on the range of, if something happens in Gabon, are you supposed to, like,
Yeah. I
be
mean,
aware of it before it happens or while it's happening?
nobody in our shop does only one country, because we just don't have the people. Maybe Nigeria. Nigeria might be an exception. Nigeria is a huge country. It's a very important country. It is a very, stable, unstable-ish country potentially. So Nigeria might be an exception. I never worked West Africa, so, but certainly on Eastern and Southern. I mean, I've covered up to like 12 countries at the same time, which is the
Wow.
ideal. Countries of lower priority usually, but you still have to like read, you have to like keep up, but you have to prioritize too, you know?
And what does keeping up mean? Does it mean keeping up with the press in those countries? Does it mean the collectors are feeding back stuff, and you guys are trying to integrate it with open source stuff and figure out how to make uh, how to make intelligence product out of it? Like, what does it mean when there's a crisis now in Sudan? It's the biggest humanitarian disaster in the world, notwithstanding everybody's obsession with other places.
Mhm.
So I totally understand what you do right now, but now
But I don't only do
it's,
Sudan.
what's that?
I don't only do Sudan. So
No, I understand. So what's a country that you are supposed to do in addition to Sudan right now?
right now I do Kenya and South Sudan. And
Okay, so South Sudan is sort of part of the same.
well, but very different because they have their own crises and instability. And actually, I've actually been spending quite a bit of time looking at that lately. But
Right, but
keeping up is just you try to keep on top of the various streams of reporting, which would include open source, whatever clandestine and collection. Certainly, the state cables. Some countries, there's going to be more or less collection because of priorities. So some of it may just be, you read the paper, you kind of do the interview. You look at internet research, you read like Brookings reports if they have any, or something comparable. I think CSIS has a.
yeah, we are.
Bring my water gun. I need to shoot this dog with a water gun, and he's. I didn't bring it, so.
All right, so
Someone asked what countries are important. Well, at the moment, I mean, it is shocking how little attention the civil war in Sudan is getting, because it is. It is the world's biggest humanitarian disaster. It is and then it's a very. There's a lot of external interference or involvement, if I want to be more neutral about it, in Sudan because of its location. It's really kind of at the crossroads of, the Sahel, the Horn. It has the port. It's on the Red Sea. So strategically located, it's really important. There's a major oil pipeline that runs from South Sudan to Port Sudan on the Red Sea. And it's sort of become a scene of competition for various other powers. Frankly, I don't completely understand what they think they're going to get out of this deal because it's such a disaster. But
but the UAE is playing big there,
big. The UAE is such a destructive presence in Sudan right now. That's probably the biggest thing that could be done. But here's the thing. I'm realistic about Africa because I would like more people to pay attention. I would like the US government to pay more attention. But honestly, like, what are we going to do? Like, we've been, the US government, since the war began, has been doing all kinds of shuttle diplomacy and talking to people and going here and going there and trying to convene negotiations just to get a ceasefire, which they can't even get I think that has a localized ceasefire for like one day back in the summer of 2023. But, there's not a lot that the US or, could do. I mean, they could put pressure on UAE and try to mobilize against. But see, the complication of foreign policy is that then UAE has ramifications for other realms, like in the Middle East. And so in another theater, the UAE is an ally that foreign policy, that's my big takeaway.
And the UAE.
Foreign policy is maddeningly complicated. It is. And honestly, I'm glad we don't do policy. We support policy. We provide information to help people making policy come to good decisions or better decisions, because there's often not a good decision. But we are, we have proximity to the policymaking process. And so you see it, and it is just, it's 7-dimensional chess. It's just, it's so difficult. And so one of my pet peeves is honestly these activist types.
All right, let's have a rant against activist types. Which activist types drive
like? And I'm kind of a democracy activist, right? But what I'm talking about, especially on foreign policy matters, like all this Gaza stuff. I understand, like, okay, like it's terrible. I understand that. I'm sympathetic to people's sympathy for sure. I you know, and I honor people's good intentions and good hearts, but you don't understand. Nobody understands, you know, there's no real effort to get educated, and there's no real sense of nuance, and the world is incredibly nuanced and complicated, and activists try to put this binary like layout on top of it, and it just doesn't work. And here's an example. South Sudan, for instance, the reason South Sudan is a country really is because the South Sudanese rebel movement under John Garang at the time,
which
and
is
there was
non-Arab.
he was, well, South Sudan is
Right.
non-Arab on the whole, and so that was the issue. And the Sudanese government brutally oppressed them, and the war was brutal and terrible. And then Darfur is another issue. Sudan is such a mess, very complicated mess. So okay, but the reason that the South Sudan eventually became a independent country, which by the way is not in keeping with most international policies. You don't support secessionist movements because it opens a Pandora's box, especially in Africa where the colonial boundaries are arbitrary, and if you start questioning them, then you have, things just can completely go off the rails. Is because John Garang and the rebels cultivated a domestic American constituency with the Congressional Black Caucus and a very strange bedfellow white evangelicals. And they convinced white evangelicals that if this was a religious persecution narrative. And again, there's truth to that. Okay. I'm not saying there's not truth to that. But so the US intervened in a big way and really got South Sudan to independent nation status in 2011. And then it just completely dissolved into civil war and is a corrupt, horrible. It's barely a government. It's barely a country. Okay. And the interest then, there's very little interest now because it's just a mess. What do you do with it? It's not a good activist narrative. You know what I'm saying? Now, should South Sudan have never become an independent country? I don't know. I'm not going to say yes or no, but I do know that the activists who agitated so powerfully for that and then lost interest had no clue of the complexity of the situation. And
That's interesting.
yeah.
I mean, look, I do think that the percentage of people with very strong feelings about Gaza very strong feelings on both sides of the equation, who actually know a lot and actually have taken time to learn about the different equities on the side that they don't favor. The number is not small, but the percentage is tiny. And so there's actually a lot of people who know a lot and are thoughtful, but they get drowned out because if you have 200 good people and 30,000 like bad yellers, the it's very hard to find the analytic, not the analytic needle in the haystack, but the analysis needle in the haystack, right?
So activism exists in 2 dimensions, and policy exists in like 10 dimensions. And so activism has its place, but just a lot of it annoys me. And just for the last, they finally shut it down, but for almost a year after October 7th, I drive right by Tony Blinken's house on the way to work. And there was a 24-hour, like encampment on, which is, by the way, a busy road, but also a narrow road. It's like the literally worst place to have such a protest because it's dangerous to the protesters. It snarls traffic. It's just, it was a menace. Okay. But
Yeah, it was bad. And so
what
I
really bothered me is like, do they not know Tony Blinken is like, he's slogging his guts out like 24 hours a day, on trying to make something work here. You may agree or not agree with the administration's approach, but like they had the Blinken kibbutz and they had all these horrible signs about him and pictures of dead children and whatever. And it's like, he's trying, they have no concept of just the complexities involved.
okay, but I want to suggest that in the world of activism, the people who were camped out outside of Tony Blinken's house, um, uh, that is a particularly deranged form of
Sure.
activism.
There's different
And
kinds of
the
activism. Fair.
and the people who were and shouldn't be compared with the many people who are doing thoughtful activism on behalf of the same cause, the many people who are doing thoughtful advocacy that is not activism on the same cause. But I agree with you; these tend to exist in many fewer dimensions than even the thoughtful ones. You say, I'm a human rights activist. Well, that means you are putting human rights ahead of some of the other variables that a policymaker may have to think about. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but when you're a human rights activist, those things will round to zero. Those other things will round to zero. And when you're a policymaker, those other things really can't round to zero. So there was a really interesting question in the chat that I flagged while you were talking about Sudan, and I want to flag again. Um, so like hiding behind intelligence information and is one of the great refuges of scoundrels among politicians, right? Well, if you knew what I knew, you would never say that. But there's also um, uh, intelligence almost always makes the picture more complicated. Not always, but almost always. And um, and so in your experience, would the dialogue be richer if more people, leaving aside the consequences to sources and methods that would arise if more people had access to putting that aside for a second, would our dialogue be richer if more people had access to intelligence, and would it change people's minds about things? Or conversely, would everybody exclude all the information that doesn't feed their priors? And that in this sense the analytic community is actually a refined group of people who are kind of committed to looking at details in a way that other people are not, and the big picture is almost never very different if you know the intelligence.
It's very issue dependent, right? I mean, in my world, the press is there's usually not a huge gap between press and what I know. Um, Sometimes I would know things before the press, right? That's sometimes the case, but it's very issue dependent. And honestly, there's the really good stuff is compartmented, which is not for general. You can't just go on the website or whatever, the feed that we get our information and look up and find that information. Like the really good stuff is further compartmented and restricted. And so I'm not even privy to a lot of it. So, I can't comment on it. Obviously, just because something's acquired clandestinely doesn't mean it's also accurate. So that's another dimension, is you're always constantly trying to, and you work, and so are the handlers of the assets. is the information correct? Is the asset, they're always evaluating assets. There's a whole rigorous process there. You know, they could be telling the truth as they know it, but they don't actually have the access, or like they are getting it from a source who is not truthful, or they don't have the expertise to sort of to understand the information and pass it on to you. So there's all different things. Even on signals intelligence, you have to think about, sometimes part of the fun, sometimes it's a game of telephone where you're getting you're getting a conversation that's relating another conversation. And so
Right.
that's not the same as like a direct. So that's all of this reporting is always being evaluated. And the analyst also has to weigh information and evaluate it. And of course, there have been spectacular instances where the intelligence has been wrong. There's denial, deception, part of that, where the analysts have been wrong, where the policymakers pressure or they wanting a particular view influenced analytic calls. So it's not just like a magic 8-ball where if you have the access, you shake the ball and then you have all the answers of the universe. It's muddy. And actually some of the things that have frustrated me is you see, because the House and Senate committees on intelligence, which are very important, congressional oversight is so important. And before there was any, that's all most of the CIA disaster stories are before there was congressional oversight. So very important, not bashing that at all, but you see people on both sides, but lately it's been a lot of Republicans politicizing the intelligence. They'll pick out something, and they'll sort of make a big hay about it that suits their agenda. So it's not a clarifying thing. I think people might, if they understood the sort of intelligence process and how it's done, and the fact that we are, we compete with other intelligence services, and we have to have an intelligence service because everybody else has an intelligence service and they're targeting us as just like we're targeting them. And it's a whole sort of another dimension of the geopolitical game. And if people
so I want to we're about to run out of time, but I wanted to propose to you a general theory of when the intel community is most and least likely to have unique insights in answer to this question. There's going to be a gazillion exceptions in both directions, but it seems to me that where the intelligence community is least likely to have insights that the New York Times couldn't have or that Brookings couldn't have is on macro trends issues. It's famously the fall of the Soviet Union was not anticipated by the intelligence community. It was anticipated in writing repeatedly by Pat Moynihan, a senator with no particular access to classified material. And so when you're looking at the biggest questions, the intelligence community, actually their value add is relatively minimal. Not zero, but minimal. When you're looking at leadership intention questions in very specific contexts, is Russia going to invade Ukraine? Boy, did the CIA do a better job with that question than, say, the New York Times. Mm-hmm. Not that the New York Times did a bad job, but you guys had incredible data that allowed the president to go to the president of Ukraine and say, you're going to get invaded, with a very high degree of confidence. And so, like leadership intentions questions, military tactical questions, things that require very specific pieces of information are where the intelligence community is going to be at its highest value. Broadly speaking, agree or disagree?
Broadly speaking, yeah. I would say on the other stuff, that's where like sometimes the intelligence can be distracting from broader expertise and intuition. Like sometimes I feel I'm a very intuitive thinker, and sometimes I've wanted to say something but I couldn't say because the reporting wasn't there, and we don't do. I'm just have this, and you have to. I mean, you can do that to a degree, but you generally have to really. There's not much intuition or logical leaps sort of allowed in our work. And also, frankly, we don't have deep experts on every single issue that we're looking at, because you can't. We don't pay enough, for one thing, to attract those kinds of people. There's other options out there. And so we don't have the deep expertise. And I think in many cases, not having deep experts has caused people to, with lesser expertise, fixate on certain reports or certain most recent events. They're not looking at the history and the context because they don't necessarily have that. And so that's when I think mistakes have been made. Although I think on the Soviet Union, we certainly did have deep experts. And there's a
Yeah,
lot
I mean,
there's a lot of cognitive bias things involved that we
as in all
in our training, but
as in all communities.
yeah.
Okay, we got to wrap. A few procedural notes. Number one, no, Holly cannot do an interview about missionary kids next week because there's gonna be no show next week.
But also, I did one sort of
No, we're coming to that.
ago.
When the book is out, we're going to do a bunch of shows about it. Holly doesn't know this yet, but we got to wait till the book is actually
not
out.
till August, so a long time.
Yeah, so we're not scooping Holly's book for her, because then people might not read it. It's not good for an author to talk too much about a book before it comes out. So the answer to that question, Laura Donna, is no, for two reasons: no book and no show.
But go back
show
2 months ago.
Yeah, see the one 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Number two, second issue. I am going on vacation, and I'm about the only person who goes on vacation to go to Israel to talk to Israelis and Palestinians about Gaza. And but that's what I'm doing. I'm going to be away for a week. I'm presumptively not doing the show. I may post videos either live or not to the Substack. I may not be doing the Substack at all for the next week. These trips are very intense. I reserve the right. I'm not going to be writing my lawfare column, and I reserve the right to do no work of any kind. But the point is, there will not be an 8:00 a.m. show any day next week. It will resume on, I believe Monday is the 23rd. So please do not expect a show for the next couple weeks, or for the next week. We will return. We've got some great people lined up. But Dog Shirt Daily does not mean every day of the week of the year. That was in lieu of fun. This, I've got to be a little bit more discriminating. Last point, and it's a key point. The Dog Shirt Daily intelligence community assesses with high confidence, Holly Berkley Fletcher, that you are a great American, and congratulations on your career.
Thanks.
Congratulations on your retirement from the Central Intelligence Agency, and we look forward to in your new career as a public-facing troublemaker. We look forward to co-hosting Dog Shirt TV as one integral part of that. I think the technical word is mishigas. Folks, keep the faith. Don't out intelligence officers against their will. It's rude. But when intelligence officers want to out themselves, it is always fun to give them a forum. I will see you guys in a week.
Everybody, have a great day.